Customer service. In this nugget, we talk about customer service. Even though the A+ exam doesn't actually say customer service, that's really kind of what it boils down to, and so that's what I'm calling it here. It means talking about or using good skills in troubleshooting problems with your customers, and in also using good professionalism, being polite, not making your customer feel dumb, being sensitive to their situation, and many other things of this nature which we'll look at. Then there's also working with difficult customers or a difficult situation. There will be people probably just about every week that will make you somewhat frustrated with your experience with them on the phone or in their homes or in their office. So we'll talk a little bit about how to make sure that we, first of all, get the right information so that there's no frustration with miscommunication, and then also how to deal with people that might be a little bit more difficult. Now, as we talk about skills and professionalism in dealing with your customers, one of the first things we need to resolve is the proper use of language. And most of these, again, will come directly from the A+ exam objectives, although I've abbreviated the way they're worded throughout my lists here. When we talk about using the proper language, though, one of the things you want to do is to avoid using jargon. For example, if somebody's email is not working because their firewall ports are not properly open for, the proper ports for POP3 and SMTP, you wouldn't be on the phone with them and say, well, the problem here is that your TCP port 110 for POP3 and your TCP port 25 for SMTP, those aren't open on the firewall, so you need to make an exception. You see, for the average person, that's a whole lot of words without much meaning of any kind at all. A much better way to express that would be to say that there's some things with your networking that need to be changed in order for you to be able to send and receive email. And then you would step them through, how to make those firewall exceptions, for example. Number one, most people don't really care what the TC port number is or whether it's POP3 or SMTP. They just know that when they try to click send and receive in Outlook that nothing happens or they get an error message. Later on, we'll talk about documentation of what you have fixed. And in that kind of a case, you might be able to write down something a little bit more technical just because you need to be thorough with your explanation of what's been done. But make sure that at least when you speak to the customer, you make it something that they can understand to a degree. Also, you wouldn't want to use something like various types of acronyms, which is a lot of what I just used there. TCP, POP3, SMTP. And even though we used acronyms for things like SMTP, it still might not be useful to even state that out loud. You wouldn't say simple mail transport protocol because, again, the user probably doesn't care or understand what that really is. All you want to say is we're not able to send email because of a networking change or a networking configuration, so we're going to try to change that for you. Okay. Also, you want to be careful about using certain kinds of slang. First of all, slang a lot of times is generational, and if you're dealing with an older person on the phone, then they might be a little bit offended at certain kinds of slang, which might be considered rude or inappropriate in certain instances, but which are acceptable a lot of times by younger audiences. So, for example, if someone has a big problem with their computer, as a younger person, I might say, gee, you're screwed. If I was talking to one of my peers, they'd probably get a chuckle out of that and say, yeah, I know, man, help me out. This is a total bummer. But if I'm speaking with an older person, to say, you're screwed, that really is a little bit offensive to a lot of audiences. So I wouldn't speak like that unless it was a friend of mine that I knew would be able to accept that. And it wouldn't even be on a professional call. It would just be if a friend called me asking for some help or something like that. And then finally, it's not really listed in the exam objectives particularly, except, it could fall under culturally sensitive. But if you're speaking with someone else that it appears as if your native tongue is not their native tongue and there's a potential language barrier there, you need to be especially careful about things such as the jargon and the slang and so forth. You also might need to be sensitive if you can't understand them. Sometimes a thick accent might be difficult for you to make your way through, and so you may need to ask them to repeat things, and try not to get frustrated when you do that. Just be as polite as you can, and they will probably understand that there is a language difference that you'll both have to overcome. Also, do try to maintain a positive attitude. This can be a challenge because you might be dealing with a very a difficult troubleshooting scenario where you're frustrated, the customer's already mad, that's why they're calling you because something's not working, and so you can have some problems with this at times, and it varies from person to person depending upon your own temperament. We'll talk more about this when I talk about dealing with difficult customers and situations, but just keep that in mind. Also, be sure that you're listening and don't interrupt. You want to make sure that you hear all of the problems that the customer talks to you about. They also might need to just vent a little bit of frustration. Hopefully they will understand that it's not your fault that this has happened, because usually it's not, but sometimes they might blame you anyway, and there's no guarantee that a customer is going to be reasonable. Nevertheless, for the next few minutes, you're their sounding board. So be sure that you do listen to the problem. The other reason why you'd want to listen thoroughly is because there may be actually multiple problems involved in this, and if you hear the whole scenario, then it could give you clues that you would not have picked up on if you had interrupted the customer and tried to jump right to resolving the problem. And that very often, for technical folks like us who have a great deal of knowledge about a lot of these things compared to, I guess, your average customer, well, we kind of have a tendency to jump ahead and say, oh, I know exactly what's causing that, and then just interrupt the user. Well, we might be wrong. So listen. Also, we need to be culturally sensitive. And the customer might be referencing something that's important to them, but which has very little relevance to your personal life, but don't minimize what they are expressing. And it may not be a technical issue. A lot of times, issues kind of spill over. They might be working on documents that relate to their culture, for example. And you certainly wouldn't want to treat those documents as if they were any less important than any other kind of important document. Also, be punctual. This is something that we really do need to be careful of, because if you're not punctual to the customer, that makes it seem as if you're not important to them, and we want to make sure that the customer does feel well taken care of. Normally, what will happen is if you have to do an on-site visit, the customer service representative that the customer calls will normally say we have time between 10 and 12 or 12 and 2 or a range of times that you can be expected. A lot of times people are taking off work so that they can meet you to fix this problem. They could actually be losing wages in order to meet you. So punctuality is very important in this kind of a situation. Also, if you are going to be late, it's important to call the other customer as soon as possible to let them know. This often happens because a specific troubleshooting call you were on might be taking longer than you expected. So call them, be polite about it and apologetic, and say, I'm so sorry, we're going to be a little bit later than expected. Another customer had more problems than we expected with their computer, and so it took us a little longer than we thought. But I'll be there, and then try to give them a range of time as much as possible. A lot of times for our cable provider, I had trouble, for example, with my cable television signal a few weeks ago, and they gave me that call exactly, saying that they had a previous troubleshooting scenario that took a little bit longer than expected. And then he called me as soon as he was getting ready to leave and let me know that he would be at my location in like 15 minutes or something. Also, be very careful about distractions. This can come a number of different ways. These kind of distractions can be things, number one, that you might not be able to avoid. You might be in a customer's home where there's a small child that wants to play with all of the tools in your toolbox and start taking things apart. This probably will go a long ways towards explaining why they're having trouble with their computer in the first place. But some of the other things are distractions that you can help. For example, if everyone has a cell phone these days, and if your friends are texting you while you're at work, don't respond back with text right there at the place. Just go ahead and wait for those until you're on your break, or until you have a more opportune time where you're not being distracted from the current task at hand. If you're on a phone call, then the user doesn't know exactly what you're doing. They probably assume that you're in front of a computer, of course. But if you're checking email while they're going on about the problems that they've been experiencing and so forth, you're likely to miss some details. Plus, once again, it's just not professional if you're shopping on eBay or looking through your emails and stuff while customers are trying to get some help from you. Also, for skills and professionalism, a couple of other things to keep in mind is to avoid personal calls. Now, some locations will not allow personal calls as a matter of job consequence. In other words, if you take a personal call or do a personal text while you're in a call center, for example, you can lose your job. My sister has a job where she's in a call center, and if she does that at all, her job is gone. So that's strictly not allowed. And if her daughter has an emergency where she has to be contacted, her daughter knows how to contact her work and go through the proper channels. But in terms of common sense, once again, there might be times when you know that you have to take a call. For example, if you're in a customer's home and a wife calls who's expecting a baby, well, obviously that might be a time. Or if you are in a customer's home and the daycare center calls or the school calls, well, maybe your daughter or your son had an allergic reaction to something or has a medical, something like that, that obviously you might need to take the call for. If it's something that can wait, then just simply offer to call back and apologize to the customer and say, I had to take that for just a moment. I'm sorry. It could have been an emergency. Turns out everything's okay, hopefully. So, those kinds of common sense items. And then for coworkers, normally when you're on the phone, people can discern that because your lips are moving. But some coworkers may need help discerning the obvious, so you can usually point to your headset or give some other indication that you're on the phone. Hopefully they'll leave you alone. Also, personal interruptions. This could be real hard for me if I have to be in the field this coming Sunday because the Suns are in the playoffs here and they're playing the Lakers. We already lost the first 2 games, and it's going to be real hard for me not to check my phone for updated scores and such. So that might be a little bit difficult. Hopefully, with any luck, the customer will also be interested in the Suns game and have that on the TV nearby. Although, out of the corner of my eye, if I'm watching that game, that would also fall under the heading of distractions that I'm supposed to avoid, but I'll do my very best anyway. Now, sometimes you're going to run into difficulties in your job. This could have to do with just the technical details of what you're trying to troubleshoot. Maybe it's a long process that you have to work through. It's just kind of frustrating. Or it could have to do with the person you're dealing with. A lot of times customers, when they call, they're already mad because they're frustrated that they can't get their computer to work. And so when they call you, they may take it out on you. Now, most decent humans will know that. It's not your fault personally. You've probably never even talked to this person before. However, they may just want to vent, and you may need to let them do that just a little bit. But when they do that, it's easy to start wanting to argue with them. Say, I'm sorry, sir, I have never even seen your computer. I've never been over there. This is not really my fault. I'm going to do the best I can to help you, but you're just going to have to calm down. Well, you see, that's a little bit argumentative, and it's also a little bit defensive. A lot of times our pride can get in the way of certain things, and you have to be very, very careful of arguing or being defensive with folks. Now, the only exception to that would be, and this is not an A+ thing, in many organizations like call centers, if someone calls and they're using a lot of foul language or being very offensive or being very personal with you or calling you names, then the handbook for most organizations would be that you do not have to be subjected to that. And you don't want to just hang up on the person usually, but you can try to break in, and this might be an exception where maybe you could interrupt. You can break in and say, I'm sorry, sir, I have to ask you to please stop using that language, and I'd like to be able to help you as much as I can. But you can ask them to stop using that language, or you may tell them that they'll have to call back. Sometimes you may also have to call a supervisor as well. So you have to be careful of this sort of thing, though. This can get very heated, and you got to be careful of that. Also, don't minimize that customer's problem. I mean, it's a big deal to them. So if it wasn't a big deal, they wouldn't be calling you. But it might be very simple to you and very easy. So if you answer back that this is a very simple and easy thing, and make the user feel as if they should have figured this out on their own, well, you're minimizing their problem, and you might make them feel stupid in the process. So be careful not to do that. You also want to avoid being judgmental. Now, this could come up with a number of different things. They may say something on the phone. A lot of times customers will say something that reflects a personal opinion or reflects a personal preference of some type. You may disagree substantially with what it is that they are telling you. It could be political, could be religious, could be social, environmental, lots of different things. You have to keep on track with the reason why they're calling you, and that's technical. So avoid being judgmental about any of their opinions. And if you don't, then a lot of times you can get into this point here again at number 1, and that would be a real disaster. Also, you want to be sure that you clarify the customer's statement, and that can often be done through another objective here, which is to restate, to verify what the customer's telling you. For example, if the customer says, I double-click on that blue E on my desktop, and then nothing happens. Well, what they're trying to probably say is that they are trying to open up Internet Explorer, but they can't seem to get on the Internet. So you might reflect that back to them and say, are you saying, sir, that when you try to double-click on Internet Explorer that you don't have any Internet access? You might ask them that. And then they will probably say, oh, yes, that's what I mean to say. So that's how you can confirm what they're saying. Now you need to get that confirmation because it could be something else. Maybe they have an application that they've installed and it installs a blue E on the desktop. So when they're double clicking on it, it could be that the application has a problem, not Internet Explorer or not their internet access. And when you're talking to the customer, you very often want to ask open-ended questions. This will help to avoid any personal assumptions that you may have made or any potential that you may have to jump to conclusions. So ask them open-ended questions rather than questions that are seeking out a specific answer. Because a lot of times the assumptions we might make could be down the wrong path, and you can't be right 100% of the time. So make sure that you keep open-ended questions as you talk to the customer. Other difficulties you might run into relate to the customer's expectations and how soon they want something fixed. Almost all the time, people want things fixed right away, though most reasonable people understand that something could take a little bit of time. So what you need to do is to set the user's expectations. One thing that's you got to be very careful not to do is to paint yourself in a corner, so to speak, or to put an impossible timeline on yourself. So don't say, well, I think we'll probably have this fixed in 10 minutes, because you might not even really know what the problem is quite yet. So you cannot commit to specific times. Exceptions to that might be if a server is down for a known period of maintenance. So for example, maybe you're applying service packs to your Exchange server. You know that it usually takes about 10 minutes to apply the service pack and then reboot the computer. And then you can say, between 15 and 20 minutes maybe, we'll have the computer back up. You might be able to do that. Otherwise, try to avoid timelines, because if you say, I'm sure we'll have this fixed in 15 minutes, then they're going to hold you to it, and they're going to be upset if you don't make that. So make sure you set their expectations in that respect, and then also communicate the status. I mean, if they're having trouble accessing a file server, for example, through a mapped network drive, and they say, every time I double click on it, I get a red X or some message that says I can't find that file. Well, when you troubleshoot this, you may find out that the file server is down unexpectedly. Well, the communication of status there would be to call or send a message back to the user saying, the file server is down, we're trying to resolve this as soon as possible, and I'll let you know when it's available again. Okay, so you can communicate that incremental status. Other things you want to do is to offer various repair or replacement options where applicable. I mean, sometimes there's really only one answer to resolve things. I mean, if their modem is not working and it's because you've determined that the modem is bad, well, you replace it. There's really not a whole lot there other than maybe offering different vendors, but for most modems, it's pretty straightforward. However, if they have additional options, you can offer that to them. For example, if a user calls you and says, hey, I want you to please make my computer play Blu-ray discs, and they only have a CD-ROM instead of a Blu-ray DVD player in their computer, well, what do you need to do? You need to install a Blu-ray DVD player. If their video card's not up to snuff, you may need to replace the video card. If the monitor is an older CRT, you're probably going to need to replace the monitor if they want true HD. Now, if they want to play Blu-ray in their computer, but they don't really care if it's true HD or not, they could probably keep their existing video card and monitor, and they'll play Blu-ray. It's just that it's not going to show HD. So you'd give them those options. Sir, you can either play Blu-ray but not see all the full detail in HD. It'll still play, but you're not going to get that same resolution. Or I can also replace your video card and your monitor, and of course you'll have to offer the additional expense of that as well. That's often where their choices are going to come in. The other thing you want to do is to document what problem occurred that you were able to diagnose and what services you performed in order to resolve the issue. This has two purposes. Number one, it's useful for your own internal records. Many times your company will require you to document what parts you used and how long you were there, what services you provided, and the like. And it also is a value for the customer so that they can understand that they received something for the money that they paid out, especially if it's like a retail customer. This is also where you're going to need to document the problem in the actual technical terms. When you're talking to the user, of course, you don't want to use certain jargon and acronyms and things like this. But when you document the problem, you want to write down specifically what technical issues were encountered and resolved. Also, you want to follow up to verify the user's satisfaction. So if you're replacing, a hard drive for an executive in their office, but they're out of town, then you might leave a note for them saying, I replaced your hard drive. If you have any issues with this, please call me back. I want to make sure that you're satisfied. Here's my phone number. Here's my email, whatever. You can leave a note like that to follow up. Or if you know when they're coming back, you can also call them back to see that if everything's working fine for them. Also, you want to carefully guard customer confidentiality. In a retail environment, like when you're going into a home user's location, then they will obviously have things like QuickBooks or Quicken files, tax returns, personal photographs. All these sorts of things are personal and or confidential, and you want to make sure that you protect that carefully. This means that you do not copy it to any kind of media that you could then take with you, or if you do, for example, as in the case of a backup, if you're replacing their hard drive, make sure that you leave that backup with them on like a DVD or something of this nature. Also, as you're looking through their files, you only look through their files if you're invited to and if it's part of the problem. Now, as you look through them, let's say it's personal photographs or family photographs or something like that, do not make comments about what you see. So if they have a cute kid in there somewhere, don't say, "Oh, isn't that a cute baby?" Well, don't do that. Some people get creeped out by that, and so that might put you in a negative light. Or if you're trying to troubleshoot their accounting software and you see what their bank balance is, you wouldn't want to say, "Wow, you've got some substantial cash in there, don't you?" Well, that would just be unprofessional, and that would make them uncomfortable. Obviously, they know that you can see that, but when you start to express an opinion about it or express a personal interest in something, that's just a little bit weird. So you don't want to do that. All right, now before we conclude here, I've got to take you to a particular website. This is more for entertainment value than anything, although it does have some educational value in the sense of what you should not do for customer service when you're helping someone on a help desk call. You may have seen this before. It's kind of a classic in the IT world, but go to a website, and you can see it right up here at the top, deadtroll.com, and look for a video called Internet Help Desk. There's a studio version as well as a live version. I recommend the studio version, and this pretty much is this guy right here. I think his name's Wes, and he is training this guy over here as a new rookie on the Internet Help Desk. It's quite hilarious, very well worth watching. I strongly recommend it. Also, I want to point out that it's too long to list here in this particular nugget, but I'm going to post on our documents that you can download from www.nuggetlab.com someone who is integrally involved in this whole production. This actually comes from real-life stories, even though it's kind of farcical. It comes from real experiences, and so I'm going to put that up on nuggetlab.com for you just for your own enjoyment and reading. In this nugget, we discussed customer service. Here we took a look at the various skills and professionalism that you need to exhibit as a A-plus technician trying to help your users out. Remember, this means like not using things such as jargon, acronyms, various types of slang, and so forth. You will need to also make sure that you have a positive attitude, that you avoid any kind of distractions or personal calls, and things of this nature. Also, we talked about difficult customers or situations. Now, I'm not going to tell you that there's a panacea or a cure-all to make your customer nicer or better for you in a lot of different respects. However, for our part, it's important not to do things such as argue with the customer, to make sure that we are not being judgmental, that we also communicate clearly and we have a good understanding of the problem that they are experiencing as well. And that's going to help to avoid a lot of the frustrations that you might otherwise see. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.